Thank you very much for being with us here today. We're going to learn about the amazing power of technology, but more important than the technology itself is what happens when you put people, citizens, at the center of your operations. As you can imagine, if you're running a business, if you come in second place, you have enough market share to still compete. But in politics, if you come in second place, you've lost. It's a zero-sum game, so the stakes are extremely high. I'm honored to be joined by President Obama's dream team that led to the technology victory. So we're joined by Michael Slaby, who is the Chief Innovation Integration Officer for the campaign. Welcome, Michael. You're joined by Allison, who actually was the Director of Correspondence. Every piece of correspondence that came in, she had to figure out what to do with it, figure out sort of the business processes around that, and make sure that we were connecting with the right folks. Welcome, Allison. And also with Ed, who was actually the lead Salesforce administrator in the campaign. And Ed did some amazing stuff from a technology perspective, which he'll jump into. But let's start with you, Michael. You were in the campaign both times, in 2008, which led to a victory, and again in 2012. Very few people can claim two victories across time. Talk to us about the first conversations that you had with David Plouffe, who was the campaign manager in 2008, and then with Jim Messina, who was a campaign manager in 2012, in terms of what your mandate and charge was.
Sure. I think it's a good place to start. And when we think about the main innovations coming out of the 2008 campaign, they really focused around the elevation and integration of digital across our entire organization, making digital not just a sort of subservient piece or tool within communications, but something that was going to get applied to fundraising and organizing and our internal operations in every aspect of the campaign. And I think David Plouffe, our campaign manager in 2008, deserves a lot of credit for helping ensure sort of structurally that happened. And his leadership around the potential for digital as a way to reach new people and as a way to involve new people in politics was really important. As we thought about the 2012 campaign, Jim Messina was correctly adamant about the fact that the 2008 campaign wasn't going to win in 2012, that the world had moved forward, that social media, which was clearly an important piece in 2008, had matured and become more ubiquitous, had become more sort of central to the way people consume information, and people's expectations for being able to make their own choices about where they engage with us, where they consume content, meant that we had to think very differently about how we were organized internally. The reality, if we wanted to offer a meaningfully integrated, unified experience to people who wanted to be part of the community that we were building, and this is a promise that we had to deliver on. It was something that the president talked about starting all the way back in 2007 when he was the senator with the funny name speaking in someone's backyard in Storm Lake, Iowa to 20 people, was that this campaign was about you. It was about people taking ownership of their communities and about people sort of having the power and a meaningful role in politics again. And for us to deliver on that promise now meant a much more integrated view of the relationship between fundraising and organizing and all of these other pieces, digital organizing and traditional field organizing, for instance, that we inherited all of this sort of institutional memory about how these things worked, but hadn't sort of a really deep integrated level of collaboration wasn't part of that. And that was something that was new. It was something that we had to learn sort of new skills around integration to make sure that a person who comes to the campaign who wants to be part of what we're doing, they're going to sort of enter the campaign or choose a point of engagement that's either maybe they're going to show up an event, they're going to come into a local field office, they're going to start retweeting content or following us online, they're going to send us a letter, they're going to call the office, they're going to make a donation. This is a person taking a whole set of actions that we need to see across the entire organization, which is not how we're set up. How we're set up is the field program works with volunteers, and the fundraising department works with donors, and the correspondence department works with cases. right? And in the past, those were separate systems and a separate way of thinking, and the only way that we could operate building this sort of massive, insane Fortune 500, disposable Fortune 500 company in 6 months was to just be as siloed as we could handle and go as fast as we could. But Jim knew that wasn't good enough. And so it forced us into this position where we had to do the work of doing the integration behind the scenes, so it was a person taking actions and that we could see people across systems. And that meant all of our systems, not just, there is no magic campaign platform, right, that solves all of these problems. And it meant being able to see the same people across all these places was this sort of challenging, ongoing data integration challenge that meant platforms that allowed us to scale, change their user experience, but connect data to other sources were essential to getting anywhere with this sort of unified view of community members.
So help us understand the scale at which you operated. So 310 million people across the country. You had operations in 50 states across the union, and you had to scale up an organization, $1 billion organization, as you said, in less than a year. How did you approach philosophically rolling out technology?
The philosophical approach to technology was it better work, and it doesn't have a choice but not to not. It's not that, it wasn't that philosophical. There's a lot of brute force involved in just making sure things have to work. The stakes are incredibly high with everything that we choose to do, which means we can't get distracted by novelty, right? We can't sort of try new platforms just because we think they're fun, and the chance that they might fail and we'll try something else. I joke a lot that fail fast is too slow. We have to get everything right the first time. And so, the organization is massive. It's the heart of the organization is, the hundreds of millions of people across the country who want to take an ownership in politics and want their country to go in the right direction, in a direction that's meaningful and that's sort of backed by their values. That's driven by 2.2 million volunteers around the country. We had thousands of field organizers on staff that are sort of their link to the rest of the campaign operation. We had hundreds of field offices around the country. We did have a presence in every state. It's a really big operation, and fundamentally, headquarters is a service entity for the rest of the organization. It's the campaign. A national campaign is a bit of a misnomer for people who aren't sort of familiar with the way politics works. Sort of operationally, it's really a collection of 50 state campaigns that are served by a national headquarters.
So Allison, you probably had one of the toughest jobs with 2.2 million volunteers, 1,000+ field offices. I'm sure there's a lot of incoming correspondence. How did you guys handle that?
Sure. So we had, towards the end, we had about 6 million cases that came in, emails, and believe it or not, people still write letters. So we had boxes upon boxes of letters, and all of that was managed within Salesforce. So on a day-to-day, the way that we kept a personal touch, even though someone writing us might be one of millions, was our system was set up in a way where the emails that could be answered quickly with a template, how to volunteer, how to donate, those types of things could go to a separate queue and just be quickly taken care of. But those that needed more care, a personal story, something that we really wanted to make a connection with that voter, the volunteer could nominate it to then get additional care from a staff member who would then tailor a more personal response. And actually, in some cases, a volunteer would nominate some of these emails to go all the way up the chain and were actually responded to by the president himself. So I think a large part of how we managed it was organizing it and making sure we had separate buckets for what people were talking about.
Can you talk about the story that related to how the president found an individual who talked about how his policies contributed to his well-being that he actually shared at the DNC?
Yeah, that was definitely our proudest moment. We had set up, Ed had set up an outstanding story queue. So what that did was when a volunteer found a really outstanding story that needed to be heard that might have just been lost in the shuffle if we didn't have this organizational system, they nominated it, and then we would review it once a week, and then those stories were then sent on to senior staff and the communications team. And several times, a lot of the stories would end up in the president's speeches, including one story from a boy that ended up in the president's convention speech. So that was really personal and meaningful to him. And of course, when he writes us and it ends up in the president's speech, he's more likely to go and volunteer with the campaign, or commit to vote, obviously, or tell his neighbors about it, or bring it to a PTA meeting. So being able to give those personal touches was really helpful, and we wouldn't have been able to manage it without Salesforce.
So Ed, you take this approach to an integrated campaign that Slaby laid out, and you're on the ground implementing a lot of this technology. Can you share sort of some of the lessons and what types of applications you rolled out?
Sure. So yeah, I walk into the campaign office, and they lay out these 4 mission-critical apps that have to be up and running in no time at all. I think like 6 weeks to get these first 4 up and running. And really the core one was correspondence, Allison's application that she managed on a day-to-day basis. And we knew that the tool would be Salesforce. We knew that within Salesforce the technology would be email to case. That was the only piece of the puzzle we were given. And so one of my first things I did was I sat down with Allison, and we really just mapped out how exactly do we want this process to flow, because I knew that Salesforce was really good at marrying process to technology as long as you can define your process. And so we spent a lot of time on that. I went and I configured it. I thought it was amazing. I sat down and I demoed with Allison. I was like, look, these volunteers are going to be able to manage a case with like 10 to 12 clicks, and it should only take them about a minute or so. Voila, I'm done, moving on to the next project. And she was like, no. It needs to be like 4 clicks and 10 seconds. And if we can do a bunch of them at once, So we went back to the drawing board and figured out how we could kind of shorten that, and more automation, and kind of what we could bulkify. And so we worked together, shaping that process, using Salesforce to build that out to something where, a volunteer could sit down, be trained in 10, 15 minutes, and use the system. And it really had to be error-proof, because we couldn't be sending out bad information, bad correspondence to constituents. And going back to Slaby's original point, just had to work.
I think an important detail here is that this is sort of an impossibly agile environment, right? Where you have impossibly high stakes, where nothing can go wrong, no time, not enough resources, and demanding clients because they need to be demanding about doing the job that they've been asked to do, which is speak for the president. This is not a small task, and sort of the relationship between these two, getting that job done by sort of optimizing and sort of making sort of scalable an intensely human process is, I think, the thing that's really important to recognize here, that it's not about some magic technology to take all the humans out of it, right? It's about using technology to empower our volunteers to be more human with more people more quickly, right? Because these are relationship channels. These are social media, and people's expectations for what it means to engage with an organization are demanding more and more of personal, meaningful, direct interactions and relationship, and that's what this process was about.
And Ed, can you talk a little more about the applications that you deployed? I know you did 4 specific apps. What were the business problems you were solving?
So in addition to the correspondence app, we had 3 other ones with kind of varying levels of complexity and exposure. Like I said, the correspondence was the largest one. We also did one for the correspondence recognition, where we wanted people from within the campaign to be able to recognize volunteers or people connected to the campaign. And so we had this process built out to manage those requests. We built a request form on the Force.com platform that created records within a custom object that then went through an entire process and a bunch of statuses and different layers of approval depending on where it was coming from. So that was the correspondence application, or the Friends correspondence application. We also built one that would manage all of our surrogate events. This was one thing what's a surrogate? A surrogate is anyone connected to the campaign that speaks on behalf of the campaign, but is not technically part of the campaign. So this was a massive operation where we had thousands of surrogates and thousands of events, and sometimes it felt like thousands of events daily. But those were managed out of Salesforce, so we had a specific contact record type for the surrogates, and we built a custom event object that we linked together and tracked, and we built, my intern John built a really slick calendar application showing what was happening where, and we had it divvied up by different geographical divisions within the campaign. And then the final one was the state budget management application, where we needed to track our spend within each of the different states, the money that we had given to these state parties to spend, and track how they spent it. So we had committed spend versus actual spend, and we had 3 layers of hierarchy where you could track that at any of the 3 layers. So those were the 4 biggies that we had up and running really pretty quickly. Amazing.
So before I turn it over for questions, a number of articles have actually been written about the campaign, the role of technology, and a number of authors and scholars across the country and the world are actually writing books in terms of what happened between the 2 campaigns. I'd love for each of you to share, sort of, if you could distill some key lessons that folks in the room and around the country could walk away with based on your campaign experience, which is extremely unique. Whether you're a corporation, an NGO, or a nation state. So, Michael, why don't we start with you?
I think so I was sort of trying to point out with sort of the question around agility is I think the most important thing about technology is that we have to be inside a non-technical organization like a campaign or an advocacy organization or most companies. Technology ought to be in service of a greater purpose and be connected to improving the process and making more effective and more efficient the people who are driving your organization forward. Technology is a force multiplier. Technology is not the point of a campaign. We don't get more votes for having better tech than the Romney campaign. Like, I think those articles are sort of funny, but not sort of miss the point about sort of the nature of how campaigns are won and sort of the role of technology inside our organization, which is about improving and making more effective and more efficient the human experience of volunteering and taking an ownership of politics. And so distilling your mission and your company's values and purpose is the first step to figuring out how innovation can help drive you forward. But if you start at the other end, if you start at sort of the tactics end of this hierarchy from values to mission to strategy to tactics, you're just going to be a little lost in the forest because there's a million shiny objects you can try, and there's a lot of platforms and technology and ideas that are all interesting, and many of them might help you, but you have no idea why you're picking any of them off the shelf other than that they happen to be the shiniest you saw that day, or you read an article in Matchable, or your boss did, which is even worse. Comes to you with this magic article that you read, and he's emailing you at 2 o'clock in the morning like, we have to have this. And all you're doing is pulling your hair out going, why do we need to do this? That's the right question to ask, is why? What is it that we are trying to achieve, and how is it that the technology is going to make what we're doing as an organization more powerful?
I think for me, the biggest lesson that I learned is that simple is really hard. To make things simple for our users. We wanted to make it easy for them to use. We were dealing with people that came from all different backgrounds, had all different skill sets. So we wanted to make things very streamlined, very simple to use. And also just in responding to the customer, in our case the voter, you want to be simple as well and conversational and just make it feel like they're actually talking to a person. If you're responding back with, a lot of jargon or a lot of complicated words, it's not as meaningful to that person. So I think keeping it simple was our biggest lesson, that worked the best, and to be just friendly and conversational. Those were the templates and the emails that got the greatest response from us.
For me, it was kind of the original thing that drew me to Salesforce, was that you no longer had to shape your process to fit your technology. That's when I jumped careers and moved from a sales thing into Salesforce, into cloud computing, and really started to explore technology, was the fact that you no longer had to shape what you did based on your limitations of the software. And so with Salesforce and the campaign, we really were able to exercise that to a degree that I never really could have imagined possible before, and really just kind of take technology out of that equation. What do you really want to do? Now let's do it.
Great. So let me open it up for questions from the audience. We've got a mic right there.
This question's for Ed. Were you the were you the guy who was building the actual applications, as well as the Salesforce developer, programmer, as well as designing the Force.com sites and things of that nature, or did you have help?
Yeah, so I did have some help. I took on as much as I possibly could because, you work within limited budgets, and I was able to figure out the process better than anyone, and just, being absorbed with it. So I built as much as I could. I cannot code at all. I can kind of look through Apex and see what's going on. I can make minor edits. So we had a small consulting company that aided us, and so I pushed all of my development work through them. And then I also had an amazing kind of team of volunteers who would, donate hours, as it were, evenings and weekends. I could just reach out to them and get some help, and really just kind of built my own support community through there.
Yes, sir.
Hi. I've got a million questions I could probably ask you about everything that you're doing. And it's fascinating, and I'm really excited to share what you did with my colleagues at my nonprofit consulting firm who are struggling with understanding what we can do. I mean, when I tell them that you got people up and running using cases in 15 minutes to respond to things, they're going to love that. When I talk about mapping process, they're going to love that. But I had more of just sort of a curiosity question. There's been some press lately about how the president is going to try to use direct appeals to the voters to try to accomplish more of what he's trying to accomplish. And I'm wondering, is he utilizing the same tools and apps and platforms for leveraging those relationships that you guys built, or is this a different system?
Sure. I think, the opportunity of the White House tools and the campaign tools are entirely separate. And so none of the Obama for America community sort of living on in a new organization called Organizing for Action that is just coming to life and is going to inherit a lot of the community and a lot of the energy that we've built over the last 5 years. We spent a lot of time after the campaign asking the community what they wanted, asking people how they wanted to stay involved. It was never about just the election in terms of how we talked to them, and it was never about just the election for them. It was about the country and their lives and how policy and leadership was going to lead to a better country and a better life for American people. And so those answers are informing how Organizing for Action comes to life. And it's being run by an amazing guy named John Carson, who was our national field director in 2008 and spent the last 4 years in a couple of roles inside the White House and is now left to take on this new challenge. And they're just getting the lights on. They're just getting started. In terms of, the president and the White House team has led, the digital team there is led by a guy named Macon Phillips. There are lots of interesting and amazing programs that he has built and that they have been able to leverage inside the White House. They have very different limitations. And there's a very hard boundary between any campaign resources and government resources. We're sort of two very different worlds.
Thank you.
Let me go right there.
Thanks. Like the gentleman before me, I have tons of questions. I guess the first thing, no monetary interest in this, but just to kind of feel the impact. How many users did you actually have on Salesforce.com?
I think we had 120 licenses, but we had far more users than that. We had a rotating team of volunteers that would come in, and it might be once a week, might be multiple times a week, and so we had kind of a set of allotted licenses. We'd deactivate and reactivate them and kind of bring them in. So I think it was, over 800, 700, something like that?
Yeah, about 800 rotating volunteers that came in and out. So we had to make sure we had a process in place that we could train them quickly. And then you might train them and they might not come back again. So we didn't want to waste a lot of time training people, which is another reason why we needed an easy application for people to learn.
Can I ask another question? My next question is, what are each of you doing now?
So Allison and I are part of a Salesforce consulting partner called Blue Wolf. We are based out of the Chicago region, and I'm a project manager. She's a consultant with the team, and so we are going out and doing what we did for Obama for America for companies through Chicago and nationally.
I just learned about Salesforce about a year and a half ago and fell in love with it. So now I'm consulting for Salesforce. So.
And I'm doing odd jobs. I'm the busiest unemployed person in America probably. Everything from I'm obsessed with the challenge of the technology deficit in the nonprofit space. It's something I work on a lot. I work with a lot of nonprofits. I just got back from a project in Kenya working on trying to help violence prevention around their elections, which are coming up next week, and trying to figure out sort of what's the next sort of big thing to jump into. But keeping pretty busy in the meantime.
All right, one last question over here.
We in the corporate world tend to compare technology platforms used by various corporations. So in this, the other corporation was the campaign for the Republican candidate. What were they using?
Do we know? We don't have a ton of visibility into sort of how they handled these challenges. I think a lot of the sort of competitive comparison between us and the Romney campaign is a little unfair to the Romney campaign. Actually, it's a lot unfair to the Romney campaign. We had this incredible gift of a year of time, the gift of incumbency to plan and think and do product development and build process and build a team that they never had. Their campaign looked and was organized a lot more like our campaign was in 08, where we were fighting for our lives through a long, protracted primary where we had an election every week and no time to plan, and couldn't scale to sort of general election size until really, really late. And so they, much like we did in 08, they were in the position where they didn't have the luxury of building and engineering their own solutions to problems, and they were in a position where they had to buy a lot of technology, which is, like I said, very much, and they had very similar problems to what we had in 08. And I think a lot of that is not a function of a lack of desire to be innovative, but the resource constraints and the reality of trying to win a long, hard primary.
Great. Please join me in thanking Michael, Allison, and Ed. Thank you. Thanks for being here.